In this episode, I'll be sharing 5 stress management tips that may surprise you. Welcome to the Hill with Jill podcast. I'm your host, Jill Yeiter. Each week, I share one short, digestible episode to help you create clarity and ease in your wellness story. I'll be exploring self-care, intuition, mindfulness, intentional living, and more. If you enjoy a fresh perspective, agree that life is not black and white, and want to improve your relationship with yourself, then you're in the right place. Welcome to episode 10 of the Heal with Jill podcast. We're going to start our chat about stress management tips that may surprise you. This is actually the 7th and final area on the Wheel of Health that I've introduced. That doesn't mean that this is the last episode of the podcast by any means. It just means it wraps up those areas on the Wheel of Health that I introduced. So resiliency is the capacity for you to return to a state of wellness again and again, despite what life throws at you. And stress management is a strategy that helps you return to this state of wellness. And the tips that I'm going to share with you, I like to call them almost pre-stress management tips or techniques because they come into play before you even take action. So there's hundreds of different ways that you can take action to manage stress. But these tips are almost like what mentally needs to take place, in my opinion, before you take action on any of those steps so that what you do decide to do is more effective. So with that said, let's just jump right in. The first tip is to identify the type of stress. So I like to think of stress in 2 major categories. So the first category would be really acute, pretty intense stress, like the loss of a loved one, the breakup of a relationship, for example. And in my life experience anyway, these stressors are typically outside of our control. And they don't feel good, but they tend to have like a social or cultural set of norms or structure that is associated with how to cope, and that can be helpful. And then the other type of stress that I feel like exists is this long, slow burn stress, which is more chronic, and it can be like multiple small stressors all stacked on top of each other. And just to give you an example, it could be like skipping meals or maybe chronic low-grade financial stress or just not getting enough rest, for example. And so when all of those compound, it adds to kind of ongoing long, slow burn stress. And the tricky thing about this type of stress, I feel like, is 1, it's sometimes harder to identify, and 2, it can sneak up on us, and 3, there's not as many kind of, again, cultural or social paradigms in place to recognize it. So it might not feel validated either by yourself or others. But the good thing about this type of stress, in my opinion, is that we have more control over it. And so we can almost kind of go to the core of it. And that's the type of stress that I'm going to be talking about today, is this long, slow burn stress. We can really get to the core of it and kind of nip it before even like having to manage it, so to speak. So let's just get started now. So that's the first one, is to identify the type of stress. The second one is to recognize your unique capacity to cope. So by this, I mean, everyone has a unique capacity to deal with stress and different stressors. So what's stressful for me may not be stressful for you. Maybe taking public transportation is very stressful for me, for example, but maybe driving and maintaining a car and finding a parking spot is very stressful for you. And then that's an example of like long, chronic, slow burn stress. So over time, that really becomes aggravating when on a daily basis, you're not acknowledging and owning your capacity to cope and deal with that, for example. So the point that I'm trying to get to is that if you can recognize and really own your capacity in different areas, then you can show yourself more compassion. And if you're able to show yourself more compassion, then you have a good starting place because you're starting from a place that's not in an adversarial relationship with yourself. And everything is so much harder when you're in that kind of grind with yourself. So just opening up to that idea of beginning from a soft place of compassion, I feel like can be helpful. So the third tip is to just be 100% honest. And by that, I mean just fully owning how crappy you feel. So whether it's just how the way that you talk to yourself, or whether you write it down, or if you have a trusted person that you're able to get it out there with. But so by 100% honest, I mean, it could be like, I am so angry, I want to throw things and scream, or I am so discouraged, I feel like I weigh 10,000 pounds and I feel like I cannot pick the weight of my body and my emotions off of the floor. So, add as much flavor to it as you need to until it feels like it is so accurate in a way that you have a sense of ownership from, and start there. And then from that place, you can gradually work towards, of course, adding in some more kind of, seeing the whole picture, owning this other emotion, recognizing again that it's not black and white, that you can be super angry about one thing in your life and deeply grateful for something else in your life, that we are complex beings and there's room for all of it. And so just again, so that tip is to just 100% own how you're feeling. I feel like it can be hard. It's like we want to skip ahead to, it's not that bad, but I'm really grateful over here. Yes, you might be, but also own the stuff that's not pretty. So the next area, number 4, that tip is to get to the core of it. And by what I mean by that is after you've been really honest, just see if you can feel what the core of it feels like. Is it a need that's unmet? Is it just like a feeling or a felt sense? And then see if you can label it and like put a tag on it. So getting to it and then putting a tag on it helps us move into the 5th tip, which is to ask and then to listen. And so what I mean by this is to ask yourself, okay, now that I've kind of named the core of what's going on, and if I really listen to that, what answer am I going to receive? And it's not about responding to the first knee-jerk response. It's about waiting for kind of an answer that resonates in your whole body, that feels like it sits well with your gut, not just your cerebral thought process, but your body, every cell of your body feels like, okay, yeah. And it's not even about really liking it or about it solving the whole problem or the whole stressor, but it's about this tiny little next step that moves you just in the direction very gradually of somewhere else that you would prefer to be. So, and that means that you have to just kind of tell your automatic response self to take a back seat, and that your deeper self that knows on like a gut level, it will know when you get to the right answer of what would be helpful. And so then that answer is usually what leads you to take physical action. And if you go through these steps to begin with, then when you do take physical action, um, it will be more effective, if that makes sense. So let's just recap those. So number 1 is to identify the type of stress, whether it's acute and really severe or more of a long, slow burn. And then to recognize your unique capacity to cope is the second tip. And just along with that is showing compassion to yourself. And then the third tip is to be 100% honest with yourself about how you're feeling and accept that it's not going to be pretty. And then the fourth tip is to get to the core of it, really kind of peel the onion and identify what's the very foundation, core, essence, base layer of what the stressor is or what it is that's getting at you. And then ask yourself and listen, wait for a gut feeling kind of answer about what would happen. And it may be that it surprises you. It could be something like as simple as, oh, I don't do anything right now. Or maybe I go and walk around my garden. Or maybe I buy myself a coffee today instead of making one. It could be anything. And if you try to overthink it, then it kind of loses its beauty and its unique flow for the day. So I hope that this was helpful. Those are just 5 kind of tips that might surprise you about how to manage stress before you take action. And I will see you or talk to you next week for episode 11. And you'll have a little surprise about what that is as we move forward away from the wheel of health, but still using all of these ideas to influence our next discussions as we move towards the future. So thank you so much for joining me today. Take care and bye for now. Thanks for joining me this week on the Heal with Jill podcast. You can find all my free resources, including menu planners, mindful movement videos, and more, as well as my coaching and courses at healwithjill.com. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend and give it a rating. Take care and bye for now.